Alright, how about now? Do you got the picture? Back? Got it all? Gosh dang it. I'm not kidding. Since we were here last night, um, I literally did not turn anything off. I turned my lights off, I closed the door, and went to the living room. I touched nothing, and I come back, and there you go. So, let me just say this, since y'all didn't hear anything I said. Um, I just wanted to touch briefly, our chapter today is, relatively short, and I did wanna touch real quickly on what happened at the Colorado Supreme Court. I don't want anybody to think this is a bad thing. Honestly, for me, from a 30,000-foot look, all is being done. So I'm a very visual person. I, translate words into pictures, and to me, every time something like what happened last night is and I grew up in, Publix, the grocery store chain's hometown, so all of my family, to include my husband, he didn't work for Publix, he did all of their electrical and the build out of their warehousing as they grew throughout the '70s and '80s and '90s. So we're kind of a grocery store family, and I visualize everything happening, right now as the store manager standing up front going, "Clean up on aisle 3, clean up on aisle 5, clean up on aisle 10," um, because that's literally what's happening. The exposure of the corruption in our court system, if you take just the latest 2 examples, Rudy Giuliani is put before a court, not allowed at all to put on a defense, and then found, liable for millions, and no defense was allowed. That's a corrupt court. So to me, that's the store manager going, "Clean up on aisle 7." That needs to be cleaned up. The Supreme Court in the state of Colorado finds that an insurrection happened even though there was never a finding of insurrection or a charge of insurrection, so they literally made it up out of whole cloth, and then found somebody guilty of it to the extent that they're not going to allow their name to be put on a ballot. That's ridiculous, and the, um, reference that they cited hadn't it doesn't even apply to the president. So, everything about their decision is a joke. To me, that's another cleanup on aisle 2, and because if you, um, zoom out to the 30,000-foot look, you end up seeing how all of these things are connected. There is an exposure going on right now that if you sleep through the entire exposure, you are the people that and I know this sounds absolutely horrible, but I do mean it. In the old days, stupid people didn't survive to live long lives because they did stupid things. So, with the, invention and mandating of seat belts and helmets and everything else, there's a lot of stupid people alive. I'm just sorry, that's true. I'm not going to, and nor do I think what's happening is going to encompass all of the stupid people because they're stupid. We are going for maximum saturation of exposure to be able to go to the next step of cleanup on aisle 1. So, it's very frustrating, I get it, I get very frustrated, y'all read my post, you know sometimes I'm very frustrated. Um, oh, dang, my jewelry's falling off. Um, so I don't want y'all to be frustrated. Um, the I believe all of this is good, and I will also make this comparison, again, visually. You can see Franklin, Ben Franklin out in the field with his kite and developing the concept of a lightning rod. That's Donald Trump. Donald Trump is our lightning rod. He can walk down the street and immediately the arrows come in. Well, all you have to do when you have a lightning rod is trace it back to the source, and I believe since 2015, that has been going on. You put him out in front, immediately people saw him as a threat. They began developing as early as March as 2016 that we have evidence of right now, this spying on him. It's also been suggested that that's the whole reason why they extended FISA because they're using it as a backwards avenue, and that may be true, but it's still wrong, and we can advocate for, what is right, even acknowledging there may be a good reason for that happening. It's still wrong, and it's okay to say that. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. Don't lose hope. Don't do something stupid. There could be a time in the future where that's necessary. Today is not that day. So, with that, you're gonna notice in our book review of volume 2, chapter 11, that this is going to be the, um, putting together of all of what we, um, have had gone over. So, what Whitney did in volume 1, and it was a very good, separation of preparation and execution. So from here on, we're going to be looking at, um, everything that we learned as a foundation being applied as it relates to the Blackmail network that Jeffrey Epstein created. Now, I also wanna tell you that I have provided articles that illustrate, like the one we just, talked about in the last chapter of the guy that was in Washington, DC. There are multiple, I think his name was Spence. There are multiple all over the world. We talked about Mark, Dutroux in Belgium, multiple of these networks. There are these networks we, talked about in one of our Gladio books in England, where they were having sex parties as dinner clubs. Um, there are multiple ones all over the world. That's the whole thing in the, Thailand. It happened in the Philippines. So, understand this is one drop in the bucket. Okay, chapter 11, The Rise of Jeffrey Epstein, Unusual Beginnings. So, Jeffrey Epstein came from very basic, family. Um, he is, Jewish, and that's gonna come up. Not that we're anti-Jewish for all those ADL hawks. Um, it's important to understand secret societies, and Jewish secret societies, which we talked about, last night, are not exempt. We talked about the whole Catholic Church and the infiltration of the Masonic Lodge P2. There's nothing that's off limits when you're looking for the truth, okay? So, I just wanna caveat, saying that. We mention religion when it's important to the context of the story. What the Jeffrey Epstein story is, is many, um, Jewish, very rich people meeting under auspices of a Jewish network for doing not good things. And that would be no different than if we were talking about someone in the, I'm not gonna remember the name of the Catholic Church secret society, something Deo, that we talked about during Operation Gladio, um, because it became an integral part of how they had meetings without people knowing that they were having these meetings and the plotting of some of the terror events. So, you cannot exclude something just because it happens to be. And will we lose viewers? Yeah, we lost through 3 of our really good diggers, because unbeknownst to me, they were Catholic and didn't wanna hear bad things about the Catholic Church, even though they were all true. And that has later come with a Cynthia Chung book that we went through, and, just the most recent, court case, like, literally within the last few weeks of the Archbishop of the Catholic Church being found guilty of basically money laundering. So, we're on target. We and I've said this repeatedly, that no one's going to leave the truth, effort to exposing all of our real history without having their, rice bowl peed in. So, buckle up, buttercup. Alright. So, Jeffrey Epstein's father was a groundskeeper. Oh, hi, Tara. Dang, girl, you're up e early. Um, Father was a groundskeeper, mom was a homemaker. He Jeffrey Epstein showed very early on that he had some particular talents. It's you will hear referenced musical talents. Some of that may be in dispute, not sure, but you will hear that theme come up, whether it's a made up theme or a real theme, we're just not sure. Um, Also, one of his strong suits was mathematics. So he appears to have been singled out for some, um, almost to the level of autistic talent in particular areas intellectually. As an adult, Epstein okay, so he got selected to go to an center for the arts called Interlochen, Interlochen, where supposedly he played the bassoon. He would later donate for about 13 years heavily to this Interlochen, um, School of the Arts. In He used his connection to the school to recruit unwitting female teens with musical talents into his sex trafficking and sex blackmail network enterprise. So, he had also constructed on the campus of this facility his own lodge. It was later renamed after his conviction, but he actually had a lodge on the campus. And I did kind of um, a m a medium level dive into some of the, um, elite schools in the New York City area that at some point, um, used to be boarding schools. Now they're day schools. Many of them, to include the one that we'll get to that Epstein taught at under Donald Barr, uh, Bill Barr's dad, has had not one, but many allegations of the faculty sleeping with the students and the parents knowing it, and the parents knowingly enrolling their students into these schools, knowing they're going to be sexually preyed upon. There's a lot of those allegations when you start doing searches on some of these elite high school, junior high level schools. It's like it's a ritualistic grooming obviously, that's what they're trying to do to ours, but that has been gone it has been going on for a very long time. Yes, I know. Ha Do it. Look it up. It's crazy. So, um, Epstein graduated from Lafayette High School at 16 because of his intellectual, advancement. He skipped 2 grades. He originally studied at Copper Union, then he attended New York University, but he did not graduate. Um, he also went to, New York University's mathematics science specialty school, and that particular school can be traced back to several of these current, um, what do you call it, crypto, people. They also have some very interesting overlaps of where they have worked and where they went to school. Epstein claims to, in 1971, to have backpacked across Europe, and it was during that time that he met a lot of the royalty, supposedly through playing a piano for a Jacqueline Dupree, who was a patron of Queen Elizabeth II, and it was supposedly through these ties early on that he came across Prince Andrew. So you can, make of that what you want. To me, it seems like a contrived story of him having gotten access to the British, um, royalty, but whatever. He was seen at the New York mansion of British tycoon and corporate raider James Goldsmith, and if in fact it's true that he met the royalty through Dupree, she died in 1987, so it would have had to have happened before that, and excuse me, there's also, um Dupree did have ties to the New York Jewish communities because she converted to Judaism in 1967. She later married Daniel Barenboim, and she had a lot of friends in the music industry in New York, and she mentions a few of them, not names that we necessarily are concerned about, but they were all within a Jewish network. That's the important, theme of what we're talking about. So, Epstein would claim to have once been a concert pianist. There are things in articles dropped by known CIA media outlets that kinda build upon that theme. That's the only reason I'm mentioning it. Um, his brother, Mark, there's only 2 children, Mark and Jeffrey. Mark gives little weight to Epstein's claims to have been an accompanied pianist. In 1974, Epstein began working at the elite Dalton School teaching mathematics and physics, and that's not what he didn't graduate from college, and that isn't what he went to college to study either. There was much disagreement in the mainstream press over who at Dalton was responsible for hiring Jeffrey Epstein. The headmaster at the time he began working there, Peter Branch, was the headmaster, but the previous headmaster, Donald Barr, says that he may have actually started working there earlier, and it may have been the headmaster of the math department that hired him, which is why no one can remember when exactly he was hired. maybe it was they were just told to hire him and from someone that they're not allowed to disclose, and they don't wanna disclose when they hired him exactly because that would point to who may have told them. It's all a big mystery. Branch also noted that Barr liked to hire unconventional teachers to enhance the educational experience for students at Dalton, which is a loaded thing given what we now know that Dalton and many of these schools were grooming opportunities. So I'm sure hiring unconventional teachers um, is a very interesting way of phrasing that. So, and keep in mind, these schools cost a bajillion dollars. They're not like the $7,000 a year private schools that are in you and I's cities. These are like 60 to $100,000 a year per child, elite schools. I just wanna put that in context. Donald Barr, who is Bill Barr's dad, was the son, um, of an economist and psychologist that joined the OSS. So this sentence is worded weird. So Donald Barr joined the OSS during World War II. His dad, so that would be William Barr's grandfather, was an economist and psychologist. He is alleged to have been Donald Barr, a member of the OSS target team in Germany. And we talked about that because those were basically the current stay behind units being used in Germany at the time. He worked as a prisoner of a war camp, and again, not knowing Operation Gladio, she says that and then moves on as if that's not hugely important. Keep in mind that this is prisoner of war camp in Germany for the US. These are the people that were used to ferret out, through the rat lines, the people that they wanted to come in, um, to the United States, to go to Britain, to go to South America. They basically walked them out of the prisoner of war camps. So, him having served as one of the prisoner of war camps is huge when you put it in context of Operation Gladio. That's like a that's a paragraph. She says it in like a 5 sentence or a 5-word sentence. William Barr, his son, would subsequently follow in his father's footsteps into the world of intelligence and serve in the CIA, which is a, successor to the OSS, so basically he is following in his dad's footsteps, from 71 to 77, which overlaps with the last few years his father was the headmaster at Dalton School, including the year Donald Barr is allegedly, supposed to have hired Jeffrey Epstein. So, that provides not that we're confirming this, but that does provide the opportunity for what we will later put into context of how Jeffrey Epstein got into the intelligence world overall, and literally the grooming of Jeffrey Epstein himself for his future role. William Barr, who alleged role in Iran-Contra was mentioned in Chapter 8, would go on to serve as Attorney General both under George H.W. Bush and Donald Trump, and serve in that capacity when Jeffrey Epstein was arrested and found dead in 2019. So, that's kinda drawing a circle around the entire thing. But the one thing that I would for the hopium people, the glass half full, if in fact William Barr is part of the cleanup team on aisle 10, then that makes a lot of sense that he would be rearrested during that tenure. So that kinda adds a little confirmation, if you will, to our theory. After exiting from US intelligence, and no one exits from it, just heads up, Barr briefly worked as a literary editor and then went into academia, and she's talking about Barr Sr., not William Barr. He taught English at Columbia for 10 years while pursuing graduate studies. There, he started a series of conferences in 1955 focused on the identification, guidance, and instruction of the gifted. Barr joined the School of Engineering the following year, and these conferences then grew into a science honors program, which offered Saturday classes to gifted high schoolers. At the same time he was running this high school gifted program, Barr was also directing the Talent Preservation Project, a massive research and therapy program for high school underachievers. What? So, it's possible that Barr also discovered Epstein at this point because he's looking at underachievers and overachievers at the same time. Now, let me just tell you that if you're Intel and you are looking for vulnerable youth or autistic people that you can groom, you would have your feet in both of those camps. Just saying. Donald Barr would become headmaster at Dalton in 1964, and a decade later, in 1974, Donald Barr would leave the school under a cloud of controversy. He had meddled in college admission prospects of prominent students, including the son of writer Betty Friedan. The Dalton parent, who is credited with orchestrating his ouster, is Richard Ravitch, Ravitch, a real estate magnate who served in several government-appointed positions to include housing, related to housing, sorry about that. Um, he claimed by the end of Barr's headmaster stint that he was reviled both by teachers and parents. And you can look for yourself, there was a lot of controversy that happened, and Barr, um, was basically, alleged to have interfered, not in a positive way, with some of the people that he didn't necessarily like, maybe didn't succumb to his grooming, my speculation, in where they went to school, to college. So that part is what was at the heart of the allegations against him and why they began trying to get rid of him. Donald Barr, so I guess it was okay if he got involved in that, but when you get involved in a negative way, that's where they drew the line. Donald Barr published Space Relations. It's a bizarre science fiction novel that deals with power, drugs, and sex slavery. Let that resonate for just a minute. This is the guy who has access to the richest, wealthiest kids in the world, because some of these kids were sent in from, overseas to attend these schools, and he writes a science fiction. I've not read this, this is probably something let me star this, I need to go check out because that's just crazy crap. Um, his writing that fueled speculation that Barr's apparent decision to hire someone like Epstein was basically part of the whole extracurricular activities that Barr was involved in. Just an observation, not an accusation. Jeffrey Epstein taught mostly seniors aged 17 to 18, which kinda correlates with his, um, after, grooming program. He coached the math team. He wanted to start something called the math track team with would integrate physical exercise. I feel like I need to put that in quotations, um, with mathematical stimulation. Oh gosh, you can't make this stuff up. The Ivory Showman, he was also referred to in the school paper as the Ivory Showman on the piano, again, going back to his musical talents. Um, Theory, Epstein attended student parties, and there's several mentionings of this from previous students at Dalton. They all thought it was creepy and weird, but he did it quite often. And maybe that was part of the grooming observation of how kids interacted, because psychologically, you can tell a lot by observing students in social settings where if you can find people that are socially awkward, those are your targets for grooming, which is what Ghislaine Maxwell was accused of doing, is basically finding people in trailer parks indicating lower income. I grew up in a trailer, not offending anybody, um, that were more vulnerable and potentially in a higher need of money as their targets. And I would go on to say that, it is true that there's more likely emotional trauma through, split ups of family that would be in that environment versus, not that you're in a healthy emotional environment if your family has money, as we can see in this whole book. That, like, they're equally, but they're looking for vulnerable people that are like throwaway people, um, not rich people's kids. They do other things with them. Um, okay, so we mentioned briefly Peter Branch, who was the other headmaster when Epstein was at, Dalton. So Peter Branch did not mention any of those reports when he was interviewed in 2019 after the rearrest of Epstein, as far as him being, seen at all of the student parties where he should not have been. Um, the fact that several Dalton alumni who attended during this period asserted that the student-teacher relationship, was not unheard of. And that's the comment that when I originally read this book, I had to go look up, and that's when I found all of that, um, information about just how prevalent that is at all of those schools. So, anyway, supposedly, he leaves because he was not up to snuff. After Epstein left Dalton School in '76, he went to work for Wall Street's Bear Stearns. Bear Stearns has come up several times in our investigations as it relates to money laundering and all kinds of nefarious things. So, and their support for some of the nefarious things that we've uncovered. So, there's 2 conflicting accounts of what happened to him while he was there, um, and how he landed the his job there. He was hired as a junior assistant to a floor trader at the American Stock Exchange. Both accounts involve a guy by the name of Alan Greenberg. They refer to him as Ace, who happened to be a partner at the time of Bear Stearns, and he would later go on to become the CEO by '78. So he supposedly gets Epstein hired in '76, and 2 years later, he's promoted to the CEO. So he was a very influential guy at the time. Um, and I wanna keep in mind, I'm gonna tell you the names of the people that published these articles, but we've established that most of these articles were written in known CIA controlled mouthpiece places. So just keep that in mind. Um, quote, "So impressed was one Wall Street father of a student that he said to Epstein point blank, "What are you doing teaching math at Dalton? You should be working on Wall Street. Why don't you give my friend Ace Greenberg a call?" That's supposedly how one version of it happened. A year later, Vanity Fair, profiled this situation and said, "It's claimed that the connection with Greenberg was more direct, with Epstein tutoring Greenberg's son, who attended Dalton, and also being friendly with one of his daughters. Both claims have been repeated numerous times, though Greenberg's daughter, Lynn Koppel Greenberg, was publicly backed has publicly backed the version of events that was published in the first instance, that yet another source cited Koppel as having recommended Epstein to her father. So, that's kind of the difference in, um, how he ended up at, uh, Bear Stearns. Once there, it was like on a meteor rise. He was mentored by both Greenberg and a guy by the name of James Cain, Cayne, who had also been hired by Greenberg several years before. Quote, um, let's see, while he started off as a floor trader, quote, "He began working with wealthy clients on bigger projects that sought an edge in esoteric markets." You can take that for whatever it's worth, but it's going to come into context in a minute. According to a former executive interviewed by Fox Business, quote, "Epstein's accumulated knowledge of the tax codes and how rich people could avoid taxes through various investments made him one of Bear's prized assets in its small but specialized brokerage department." Unquote. Another statement, quote, "He never went to college, but he knew everything about taxes. In fact, he could figure out just about anything if he studied it. The guy was a genius." Unquote. Epstein had become a limited partner in relatively short order. So he's hired in '76, and by 1980, with no college degree, he's a limited partner in Bear Stearns, 4 years. He also was dating Paula Hale, Heil Fisher, now an opera producer, during this time frame. Epstein abruptly left Bear Stearns in 1981, a year after he becomes a limited partner. He claimed that he left because he wanted to run his own business, but that's not what the record shows. There's claims that he was involved in technical infringement with Epstein's later associate, Stephen Hoffenberg, claiming that Epstein had left the bank after he was caught performing illegal operations. The former Bear Stearns executive interviewed by Fox Business claimed that Epstein had been asked to leave over very serious stuff. He insisted it was related to a significant expense account violation concerning an airline ticket that upper management was misled about. That's garbage. So both Kane and Epstein deny that, while Greenberg said he was unable to recall the circumstances that his very young protege, who had risen to limited partner in 4 years, was basically told to go bye-bye about. There's no way you don't know what that was. And also Greenberg insists that Epstein left of his own volition. Vanity Fair, again, um, a CIA mouthpiece, but we have learned that after the fact, sometimes these, and Bridget's very good at digging them out, actually do report facts, but they do them long after they're not even relevant anymore, so that when you go back in history, they can say, "Oh, look, yeah, we did print that." And Julie's very good at it too, and so is Raven, her daughter. Um, and Liza has given me some amazing research as well, so I just wanna give them guys all a shout out. If you're not following them, you need to. The SEC records of Epstein in '81 tell a different story. Epstein was interviewed in an SEC investigation into Bear Stearns insider trading. It evolved around a tendered offer placed in March 1981 for St. Joe Minerals Corporation by the Brofmans. And those of you who's been with us on this long journey understand Brofman's mafia connected. Brofman has been a very corrupt, behind the scenes company in some very dubious things. So, a handful of investors were ultimately found guilty of insider trading, including Giuseppe Tomei, Tome, former head of the overseas operation of Bach& and Company, BACHE& and Company, and E.F. Hutton. The Tomei case, he was ordered to disgorge, get rid of $3.5 million dollars in illegal profits related to the 1981 failed takeover attempt by Seagram's in the mid-1986. He was ordered to do it in mid-'86. However, Tomei left the US shortly after the SEC investigation began, I bet he did, and did not return to the country after the ruling against him. The court claimed that Tomei had insinuated himself into the confidence of Seagram's Edgar Bronfman's confidence. Now, I don't believe he insinuated himself into it, 'cause that puts the onus on Tomei. We already know Bronfman looked for illegal opportunities. His entire fortune was made off of running liquor illegally. Come on now, we're not stupid here. A spokesperson for Bronfman declined to discuss the relationship with Tomei. However, if you look at the testimony, Bronfman had admitted to discussing Seagram's secrets with Tomei because Tomei counted with 20 years of business and that he ought to know the rules. So, in other words, Bronfman is working behind the scenes with Tomei. Tomei is going to be, um, profiting using the insider, but Bronfman and the SEC tries to make it, which is how you know these guys are all connected. They are basically using language to shield Bronfman as if Tomei is some fly-by-night, uh, um, shyster. Absolutely not the case, because listen to what comes up. This is a quote from a Los Angeles Times article. Tomei and Bronfman met in July of '80. Bronfman was so impressed with Tomei's financial acumen and within weeks had made him an unofficial advisor to Seagram, a major producer of and marketer of spirits and wines on foreign currency matters. The two men struck up such a close relationship that Bronfman opened a commodities account at Tomei's Geneva brokerage. Yeah, that smells like money laundering to me, but that's just me. The pair invested together in a sophisticated ladies' Broadway show, and at one point, Bronfman even covered a bounced check of Tomei's. The family vacationed together in Switzerland, they went hunting together in Virginia, so this isn't a fly-by-night shyster. Bronfman was telling Tomei of Seagram's secret plans for major corporation acquisitions, and he was probably doing so to do exactly what they did, they were taking advantage of the market. May used insider information to trade in stock and options in Texaco and Santa Fe, 2 tentative Seagram targets. Those trades were not cited in the SEC lawsuit. Wonder why that is? Because if you show a pattern of Brockman being involved in repeatedly telling him secrets, then Brockman's equally guilty, because then they would have had to have tracked where he put that money, and it would have led back to Brockman. But Brockman is part of this international syndicate, so we have to not target Brockman, but target the people who is working for them once you get caught. And once Jeffrey Epstein got caught at Burns at Bear Stearns, there has to be a SEC investigation, and you're going to give the SEC one of the people as their, um, token person that they're going to arrest, but you're gonna tip him off so he's out of the country when it all goes down, so no one's held accountable for it. You see how that works? And I can guarantee you the 3,500,000 that may have, deposited for him personally in doing all of this was not the total sum game. That's not how any of this works. So, May learned from Brockman of Seagram's plans even before some of the board of directors learned of them, because you can't have too many people early trading. It would look suspicious. Um, Brockman had considered connections to May's former employer, Bach& and Company, a company excuse me, the Brockmans had considerable connections to May's former employer. Bach& and Company, a company with ties to OSS organized crime networks previously discussed, which were Operation Gladio. The Loeb banking dynasty had intermarried into the family of Jules Bach of Bach& and Company, as well as into the Brockmans. So, basically, they plucked this guy out of Bach& and Company for him to come do all these insider deals for Brockman. That's what it sounds like to me. Um, Edgar Brockman's wife, Anne, was the daughter of John Loeb, Loeb. Not only did the Brockman Lobes and Bachs mingle through marriage, but they had multi-million-dollar holdings of all 3 families combined to make up the largest single holding of stock in the New York Empire Trust Company. Edgar Brockman had joined that company's board in 1963, so it goes way back. The Empire Trust Company, with Brockman still intimately involved, announced a merger with the Bank of New York. And remember, the Bank of New York has, shown up in many of our money laundering, um, escapades throughout Whitney Webb's book here, but also in our Operation Gladio books. Brofman was placed on the board of the Bank of New York after the merger and remained there until 1975, so for about 12 years, during the buildup of Operation Gladio. As previously mentioned in Chapter 9, the Bank of New York merged with the bank networking of Bruce Rappaport by the '80s, and in 1992, executives at the bank were found to be closely associated with Russian mobster Simeon Mo Mogilevich, who was in business with Robert Maxwell. Nice close circle. The SEC investigation took place. Rothman subsequently claimed to have no knowledge of insider trading by Tomei and claimed that Tomei conveniently outside of the country, was tried in absentia, lied to him about having been involved in illegal trades since the takeover of St. Joe. That's not even believable. Brockman ties to Tomei was considerable, and he had a history of voluntarily supplying the man with Seagram's secret plans. Tomei's case Um, it appears from May's case that Brofman seemed to have thought nothing of sharing secret plans outside the company and to an elite group of his inner circle people. Um, and again, she just makes note of the fact that the SEC had way more dirt on him with the Texaco and Santa Fe, potential targets of acquisition for Seagram's and left them out of the case, which is very suspect. Another figure sued in connection with the insider trading was a guy by the name of Dennis Levine, Levine, a prominent merger specialist with Drexel, Burnham, and Lambert Investment Company, who allegedly made $12 million in illegal profit. Drexel was corralling the majority of American corporate raiders. So, basically, that's kind of the business that they got in. Dennis Levine was directly involved with many of these raiders, specifically Ron Perlman, um, not a good guy, who dined with Epstein at Epstein's home throughout the 2000s and whose political fundraiser for Bill Clinton's reelection campaign was attended by Epstein in the mid-90s. Levine worked regularly for with Perlman, serving as the lead banker for Perlman's 1985 takeover of Revlon. Let's see, Levine also played a key role in the hostile takeover of Crown Zellerbach by a guy by the name of Sir James Goldsmith. He was a member of the infamous Claremont Club that we talked about in chapter 4. Levine was intimately involved in Goldsmith's 84-85 takeover of Crown Zellerbach. The takeover was actually the brainchild of Rothschild Inc. and its then president, Robert Peary, Pirie. Goldsmith was a longtime business associate of the Rothschilds and a distant cousin of the family. Peary and Rothschild Inc. were later the architects of Robert Maxwell's takeover of Macmillan in 1989. Maxwell and Goldsmith were closely associated, and Goldsmith would later have his own ties to Jeffrey Epstein. Goldsmith apparently knew Epstein long before Epstein had started at Bear Stearns. According to a former friend, Epstein's art collector, Stuart Provar, he had first met Epstein at Jimmy Goldsmith's mansion in the '70s. There, Provar later told Mother Jones there was somebody playing the piano with great ferocity, and it happened to be Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein ties to Goldsmith may have come through his daughter, Isabel Goldsmith, who is entered into Epstein's Little Black Book multiple times. In 1981, the attempted takeover, by Seagram's, it is worth noting that Piari's soon-to-be second in command, Gerald Goldsmith, was previously the executive vice president of E.F. Hutton, which we mentioned when we were talking about Tomei, and Tomei had also served as a top executive of E.F. Hutton. Goldsmith left to join the Rothschild Bank in 1982. These networks had surrounded the networks that surrounded the SEC investigation clearly intersected with Epstein's own network and raises the possibility that the '81 insider trading affair may have been the reason why Epstein was forced to leave. In 1981, a day after Seagram's made the tender offer at the heart of the insider trading case, Epstein resigned from Bear Stearns a day after. The SEC was tipped off that Epstein knew something about the insider trading, and the SEC interviewed him on March 1st. Mar Oh, that's interesting. Tara's telling us that she worked, in the trust, area of a bank and saw Crown Zellerbach on pension fund accounts. So, and let me just stop because Tara brings up an excellent point, and I wanna foot stomp this. Your pension funds are used routinely. We saw this repeatedly in, our Operation Gladio banking where money laundering is concerned. So they use, in particular, union pension funds because they're so huge, to orchestrate financial actions that they want to have happen, whether it's a housing crisis or, a bank failure or whatever it is. The use of pension funds is huge. And that's why states like Florida that just took all of their pension funds out of BlackRock is a major way to fight back against this international syndicate. So thanks for making that point, Tara. During the testimony, according to the SEC records, Epstein complained about how he had been disciplined for a possible Reg D violation, where he was said to have lent money to a friend who he later identified as Warren Eisenstein. Epstein said that he was questioned about the loan for his recollection on March 4th, and 5 days later, he had been fined $2,500 by the bank. The SEC was mainly interested in the timing of Epstein's exit from Bear Stearns and the Seagram's insider trading. Epstein denied any connection to the charge, but Vanity Fair noted that the SEC viewers were skeptical of Epstein's denials. It was also noted, quote, "If Epstein was such a big producer at Bear Stearns, why would he give up that gig over a $2,500 fine?" The answer is he would not. He basically was a, um, for lack of a better word, like an inside agent, and once he did what needed to be done, he made his exit. Epstein's abrupt departure and the Brockman-related insider trades go a bit beyond mere coincidence. It seems unlikely that Epstein would abandon Bear Stearns over a relatively small fine, unless he had received another offer of employment or basically that his job was done there. Given that Edgar Bronfman had been somewhat open about the plan for a Seagram's takeover of St. Joe Mineral Corporation, it is not outside the realm of possibility that those rumors would have made their way to Epstein. Epstein had become installed at Bear Stearns due to the patronage of Alan Greenberg, who is intimately involved in several of the same organizations as the Bronfmans, such as the United Jewish Appeal and the Jerusalem Foundation. The Jerusalem Foundation was created by Teddy Kollek, Kollek, which we talked about in chapter 3. Like Greenberg, the Brofmans also donated heavily to those same groups. In addition, they were closely involved in each other's affairs. Greenberg also saw his philanthropic efforts intersect closely with those of Charles Brofman per the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. Had Greenberg potentially been informed by a loose-lipped Edgar Bronfman, just as Giuseppe Tomei had been, and passed this along to one of his protégés at Bear Stearns, a Jeffrey Epstein, or maybe the whole thing was just planned, just saying. Um, Epstein was said to have worked with wealthy clients on bigger projects. Maybe those are the big projects. Maybe there was a whole bunch of them, and when they got done and the SEC opened their investigation, sometimes it's almost not almost, it appears that the SEC coming in to do limited hangout investigations allows them to put a lock on the future accountability of that. So, yeah, we heard this little rumor, we investigated, and we got this one big guy for $3.5 million. Let's just lock that away. That got taken care of. Meanwhile, all of the principals are walking away with tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in whatever that episode was. That's why it's never good to get involved in these people because there's brown shirts everywhere, and you are expendable. But if you're a good and expendable, they help you get out of the country. Th These types of things may have prompted Epstein's resignation, not so much to protect a young Epstein, but potentially to protect Greenberg, and that's exactly what I was saying, who was on his way to become the CEO. They just give you the low-hanging fruit. Yeah, FCC's good point, Brett. All of them are like that. That's why they all need to go. They're worthless. They're parasites on us. The networks of both Giuseppe Tomei and Danny Levine at this time, and how Epstein had become a fixture in those networks in short order, it may be possible that Epstein's abrupt resignation was part of an effort not just to shield Greenberg to the full extent of these particular networks, but a larger, select component of the SEC that so basically, she's making the same point that I did. These investigations are done not to get accountability, but as a shielding mechanism. If Epstein was advised to leave due to potential legal concerns, Bear Stearns was represented by a law firm, Roger and Wells, and from '76 to '81 was specifically the client of William Casey, given that he becomes the CIA director several weeks before the tender offer, it is worth reminding the reader that Casey's influence and other potential factors to consider when examining this situation. So, you have Bear Stearns represented by the future CIA director who's been in and out of the CIA multiple times and intelligence circles, um, at larger. So he's part of this infrastructure. He just so happens while all of this is going on to be representing Bear Stearns. That is not a coincidence. After leaving Bear Stearns, Epstein would later claim that he went on to manage money only for billionaires. I was the only person here's a quote from him. I was the only person crazy enough or arrogant enough or misplaced enough to make my limit $1 billion or more. I'm going to argue none of that is true. He was set up in this to do exactly that by the billionaire club, because there's nothing in his past that legitimately would allow him to open a boutique investments, service for billionaires thus far. He basically just got fired for insider trading. Hello? But that's exactly the reason why the billionaires wanted him because he has no ethics and basically had been being groomed to do exactly this for them. Okay, it appears the details of Epstein's life from '81 when he left Bear Stearns until about '86 are very questionable. His formal role as a money manager did not appear to begin until '88 when he founded J. Epstein and Company. That's when it officially began. Epstein's main company called Intercontinental Asset Group was incorporated in '81, right after he got fired. Well, resigned, whatever. Um, there's little indication that he used the company to manage billionaire wealth during that period of time. After Epstein's arrest, a former friend of Epstein's, Jesse Kornbluth, Kornbluth, stated that Epstein had claimed to be a bounty hunter for the rich and famous during this time, which kinda goes along with what he was doing on the insider trading deal. When we met in '86, this is a quote, "Epstein's double identity intrigued me. He said that he didn't just manage money for clients with mega fortunes, that he was a high-level bounty hunter. Sometimes, he told me, he worked for governments to recover money looted by African dictators." And who did installed all those African dictators? Oh, Operation Gladio. Other times, those dictators hired him to help them hide their stolen money, and those dictators all were paid off by the CIA and Mossad. Actress Anne Obregon, later stated that she had hired Epstein, who mentioned his company Intercontinental Asset Group, to help her father, Madrid-based real estate magnate Antonio Garcia Fernandez. Fernandez had been one of several powerful Spaniard individuals, which included members of the Spanish royal family, who had invested in Drysdale government securities, which collapsed due to fraud in '82. Epstein had been hired to recover money from the Drysdale collapse on behalf of her father. Similar claims also surfaced in Vicky Ward's 2003 profile of Epstein in Vanity Fair. A few of the handful of current friends who have known him since the early '80s recall that he used to tell them that he was a bounty hunter, recovering lost or stolen money for governments or the very rich people. He was licensed internationally to carry a firearm. That's a big deal. Almost like he's working for a government or something. Such as the 2001 report in the UK Standard Evening that was written by, Nigel Roser. Quote, "He had a license to carry a concealed weapon, once claimed to have worked for the CIA, although now he denies it, and owns property all over America. Once he arrived at the London home of a British arms dealer bringing a gift, a New York police-issued pump-action riot gun. God knows how he got it into the country, because he was probably traveling on a CIA diplomatic passport." The identity of this British arms dealer may have been a guy by the name of Sir Douglas Leese, Leese, per Stephen Hoffenberg, an alleged mentor to Epstein, who worked closely with him in '87. He had been introduced to Epstein by Leese and further claimed that soon after Epstein left Bear Stearns, he began working closely with a mysterious British arms dealer. What's also very important about this is Robert Maxwell and Aiden Khashoggi, who is an international arms dealer. So, if you're working closely with British arms dealers, you are going to come in contact with Robert Maxwell. Per Hoffenberg, in an interview with journalist Edward Zoll, Epstein was hired by Lease to serve as an investment banker for Lease-owned and Lease-managed companies. Julian Lease, who was Douglas Lease's son, stated that Epstein first interacted with the Lease family around 1981 after meeting another of Douglas Lease's son, Nick, at a party hosted by a well-known oil baron in Texas. Julian Lees had acknowledged that his father was a mentor to Epstein. Epstein seeming bright and intelligent as well as deeply entwined in business and social networks inside of the UK. Epstein, in the early '80s, was trained in arms trafficking and money laundering by Aiden Chico um, Khashoggi and Sir Douglas Lease jointly. Jeffrey Epstein was a participant and principal in arms trafficking and money laundering operations of Aiden Khashoggi and Sir Douglas Lease for Israel, for what was and the how they interacted with the UK. Because I've been of the opinion that Israel is an appendage of the UK based on what we found out, in several of the books in not only the establishment of Israel being a Rothschild, invention, but and I'm talking again about the state, not the, religious overtones of that, but it's basically an appendage of the UK, as we have been since 1913 when, the Rothschilds got a central bank set up here. Lee's own history is shadowy. Through the '50s and '60s, he worked at a place called Cam Gear Limited. Now, I'm not gonna go into a lot of these details, but what's important is Cambridge Limited has connections. It was acquired by TRW. For those of you who are not familiar with TRW, located out in Los Angeles, Thompson Ramo World Bridge. It's a major defense contractor, and, it's involved in things like ICBM components, aircraft, a lot of the space, program during the '80s, which is the timeframe that we're talking about, although she's going a little bit back in time, but the TRW was at the heart of all of the 1980 space program, launch vehicles, all of that stuff. TRW seems to have been Lisa's introduction to the world of weapons dealing. Um, Oddly enough, years later, a young Bill Gates, who would eventually develop his own ties to Epstein, would also get his first break thanks to TRW when he worked debugging grid software when he was 15 years old. Anecdotal evidence says Lee's family's persistent ties to TRW after it was acquired by TRW, Cam Gears would have fallen under TRW's automotive-focused subsidiary, which was headquartered in Livonia, Michigan. In 2017, the International Police and Fire Chaplains Association of Tyler, Michigan, received a 50,000 donation from Gratitude America Limited, a foundation connected to Jeffrey Epstein. The donation was brokered by Douglas Lease's son, Julian Lease, who was friends with the director Daniel Tackett. The cities of Taylor and Livonia are 13 miles apart, and the aforementioned donation seems to indicate longstanding ties of Leases to the local area, as well as Jeffrey Epstein's enduring ties to the Lease family. I think that's kind of a stretch, but it is a good connection. I mean, at least it's there. Julian Lease had denied his father was an arms dealer, claiming that he worked in defense and that he was mainly involved in the manufacturing and selling of defense products other than weapons, but that's not mutually exclusive. Both of those 2 things can be true at the same time. That's how they do this. "Oh, I'm gonna refute it by telling you another piece of the truth as if it counteracts this one, when in fact it doesn't." They both can be true. Julian Leese had conceded that his father was a friend of the notorious arms dealer Aiden Khashoggi. Douglas Leese most likely revolved around something, in the radar navigation system. So let me put this in perspective. When I was stationed in Los Angeles, TRW, I went there all the time because we had a fairly big contingent of Air Force officers doing acquisition at TRW. So I would go over there and brief them on a quarterly basis. TRW was intricately involved in transferring to civilian use the satellite GPS system. It had been a highly classified program until just before I got there, and it was then being used, to integrate into civilian use. So, the fact that Aiden Khashoggi is an arms dealer and you're talking about radar and navigational systems, hello? Some of these arms that he's dealing in is missile with guidance systems. So they act as if radar and GPS would "Oh, we're just contracting radar and GPS." It's intricately required for precision guided munitions. And when you talk about arms, we learned in Operation Gladio, arms are not guns. They were transferring helicopters and fighter jets that were being skimmed off of military operations in the desert. They are not packaging handguns. So, this is the part I think fails in this book. Without knowing what Operation Gladio is, you cannot understand some of the simple factual information presented here. So, again, it's not mutually exclusive when we're talking about um, Shikogi being an arms dealer and the fact that you have a company that is in bed with him that has control over radar and navigational systems. That's even worse. I'd rather them just be throwing around a few handguns as opposed to trafficking in GPS and, radar. Those are huge. So from '66 to '67, soon after Tangiers was acquired by TRW, Reese began living in South Wexall Manor Manor, Wraxall, a luxurious home in England. The house had been sold by its previous owner in '66. At least one account in '67 states that Lease was living in the house at the time of the sale, basically implying that he bought it because it was alleged that a mystery businessman purchased the house, which was probably purchased in a trust, which is we know how they disguise their real estate purchases. Lease a very this is a quote, "very unusual parties at Wexall Manor." Now we know what very unusual parties are based on Operation Gladio. Those are sex orgy parties for the purpose of blackmail. In 1978, those were my words, not Whitney's, the House of Rexall Limited was established with Douglas Lease and his wife listed as the company directors. So now a business, House of Wexall Limited, has been established by the Leases. Douglas Lee's address was listed in Hong Kong. That's an interesting connection. While his wife was listed at South Wexall Manor. The company was officially involved in the development and sale of real estate projects. So, let's make another connection here. Hong Kong, we know, is the hotbed of HSBC money laundering. We are already know this is still a UK territory at the time, um, and had been used extensively, especially prior to BCCI being set up, as weapons trafficking, drug trafficking, human trafficking, money laundering bank. So, it's interesting that this guy is in Hong Kong, and they're specialized in real estate projects because where do they launder money? Number 1. Number 1 money laundering destination is real estate. Alright, I'll, spell Khashoggi for you. It's his first name is Adnan, his last name is Khashoggi. Thank you, Tara, for keeping up with this. Not long after the creation of the company, Lees found himself involved in the Rexall Group. It is unclear, given the name of Lee's residence at the time, if he was the founder and owner of Rexall Group, which I'm gonna go with he is, he was certainly in charge of the group's Bermuda subsidiaries, another money laundering destination. Um, and let's see, part of the Wexall Group is a company called LORAD, Lorad Company. Lorad may have been central to not only Lisa's, but Epstein's activities in the early '80s. It's worth detailing a few of the people that were involved in the Wexall Group. So, you have first Maurice Johnston, who served in the British military, obtained the rank of lieutenant general, had served in Germany, Egypt, Jordan, Libya, Northern Ireland, and Borneo. Now, let's just take this because we know primarily Operation Gladio was ran by senior military people out of NATO as well as, civilians. So let's go over these lists of where this guy's expertise was. Germany, the origins of the stay behind unit. Egypt. Egypt was the country used for the rat lines. It is also the home of the MAFI that the UK created of Egypt that was used to create the Muslim Brotherhood and many other terror networks. Jordan, and remember what we found out about Jordan? That Israel had access to every single thing Jordan said and did. Libya, another big operation to try to take out Muammar Gaddafi. Northern Ireland was where they set up stay-behind units to create the terrorist up there that was used to destabilize the Wilson government and soft coup him, and I have not heard of Borneo in relation to anything, but he has a very interesting Operation Gladio overlaid history, just pointing that out. He was deputy chief of the defense staff in '82 and '83, which was literally the height of so can someone I'm gonna make a note of this. Can someone, while we're talking, look and see when Wilson was president or, prime minister of England? Wilson had 2 stints, as prime minister. So, it would be very interesting to know if this guy overlapped any of those. So, this guy was, in the defense ministry, which basically administered Operation Gladio, and his his name is Maurice, Maurice, in parentheses, Robert, maybe that's his go by name, Johnston, Johnston. Okay, so he retired in the military, and a year later, in '84, Johnston became the managing director of a company called Fresh Glen Limited, Rexall Group. So Fresh Glen Limited was a subordinate organization to Rexall Group. Another interesting individual was executive vice president of the Wexall Group, Peter Maxwell Dixon. Dixon had a lengthy history in engaging in fraud and suspect banking practices, ran the Bermuda-based company Grosvenor Group Holdings, decades-old offshore complex where they stashed away $1 billion for the Dukes of Westminster over the years. Grosvenor Group Holdings also controlled a Dixon-owned bank called Horizon Bank International. It was set up in 1995 by William Cooper, who then served as the bank's managing director. 81 to 84, Cooper was the general manager of the Swiss American Banking Group, which had been organized by Bruce Rappaport. I'm telling you, these guys are just so intertwined. Also with the assistance of Burton Camper, who we came across. Rappaport, as discussed before, is intimately involved in the Iran-Contra affair, the BCCI Bank, which was their money laundering preference in Pakistan, as well as international, intelligence and organized crime networks both in Israel and in Russia. He was also a close friend of William Casey. Cantor was the mob-linked attorney that had partnered with Paul Helliwell back when we were talking about the Castle Bank and all of that other stuff, which we know is all integrated into Operation Gladio. Those banks are their money laundering banks. While Dixon had his own close ties to shadow banking empire previously detailed, it is certain okay, when was it? Oh, so it was much earlier. Okay. So 64 to 70 and 74 to 76. Alright. Thank you, Bridget, for looking that up. Um, so this guy would have been defense, minister after the whole Wilson affair. So Sir Douglas Leese, who managed Wexall's businesses in Bermuda, where Dixon also resided, seems to have been very much connected to these same networks, including his reported involvement in arms deals that paralleled the Iran-Contra. These deals were alleged to have involved not only the Saudi arms dealer and Contra figure Aden Khashoggi, but also Jeffrey Epstein. The Lorad Company was one of the main Rexall subsidiaries in the Bermuda that was firmly under Lisa's control. I'm gonna argue the whole thing was, but the joint venture of Lorad and another company, formed called Norinco Lorad Limited, and 6 months later, Lorad Far East Limited was created in Hong Kong, where Lee's had already had at least one address listed earlier on the purchase of that big house. Norinco referenced here is the Chinese state-owned weapons producer, North Industries Corporation, that was founded in '80 with the approval of the State Council of China. You gotta love that. After its founding, Norinco, also with a handful of other Chinese state-owned firms, helped China to emerge as a leading arms supplier to third world countries. So just stop for just a second and understand that you have Mossad, the US, and the UK, primarily the UK and Mossad, Israel, involved in setting up front companies, getting Chinese CCP companies involved in supplying weapons to third world countries. That's what we just said. Um, to the tune of about $16 billion, which would have been $33 billion in today's, money. Well, in 2022, it's probably worth about 50 now. During the same period, much of the China's business was with Iran. Beijing had became Iran's biggest weapons supplier during the 81 to 88 Iran-Iraq war, selling almost $5 billion in weapons and munitions to Iran, according to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. These sales to Iran during this period were dominated by Norinco, as well as Poly Technologies, owned by the People's Liberation Army, PLA, and China Jiang, Jingan, controlled by the People's Armed Police. The the very year these Chinese weapons companies began selling massive amounts of weapons to Iran in '83 was also the same year the main company involved in its sales, Norinco, set up a joint venture with lease-managed Morad company in Bermuda. So, it can be argued that this is a funneling system into China and into Iran. According to Stephen Hoffenberg, by 1983, Lease was working closely with Jeffrey Epstein, specifically on the Chinese weapons to Iran. Per Hoffenberg, Saudi Arabian arms dealer Aden Khashoggi by then on the payroll of Israel's Mossad and close to the intelligence apparatus of Saudi Arabia and the US, was part of these efforts in a revenue sharing agreement with Lease on arms deals. Hoffenberg also asserts that Lease was deeply enmeshed in the British intelligence network, because of course he was. If we are to believe Hoffenberg, then Khashoggi, Lease, Epstein were working together on a parallel operation to Iran-Contra while Iran-Contra was ongoing. So it's almost like this is the big story. The Oliver North, um, brouhaha that we all said was a play. This is the real story of Iran-Contra, not the show that they put on, um, about Oliver North. Did all of that happen? Yes. This is what they were hiding. This is much bigger because it involves China. In addition, Leese and Khashoggi were both involved in the 1985 arms deal with Saudi Arabia known as a Al Yamamah deal, albeit on different sides. Khashoggi represented the French weapons industry, while Leese, along with Khashoggi's rival, Wafik Saeed, represented British defense interests, which ultimately won the day, because of course it did. Khashoggi later claimed that the deal had been secured from Britain, in part due to the involvement of Mark Thatcher, Robert Thatcher's son, whose peripheral role in the Iran-Contra was discussed earlier in Chapter 7. Margaret Thatcher was prime minister at the time of the deal, whereby Saudi Arabia paid for weapons largely manufactured by BAE Systems in oil, and accusations later arose that British had won the deal due to having bribed Saudi leadership. So, it is not unheard of for country leaders' kids to be involved in money-making deals while their parents is in office. I know that's a newsflash for all of you guys. But actually, it's been done for a very long time. Churchill's son, Thatcher's son, all sets of precedent. Oh, corruption investigations into this deal was later shut down, and thanks to Tony Blair, as well as Prince Andrews, and late who we know was an Epstein confidant. Aside from the documented Norinco lease, Leese, lease, and lease Khashoggi connections, there is further evidence that supports Hoffenberg's claims. For instance, during the same period, Aiden Khashoggi was a reported client of Epstein's. Per New York Magazine, during this period after he left Bear Stearns, why I keep saying that, and before he formally teamed up with Hoffenberg and Lex Wexner, which includes this period of time around 1983, Epstein also was known to have associated with Lease during this period. Lee subsequently appears in Epstein's Black Book. Epstein later maintained a relationship with one of Lisa's son, Julian. Douglas Lease, other son, Nicholas, who allegedly introduced Epstein to the Lease family, was arrested in 1996 and charged with 200 counts of corruption in Singapore. Furthermore, during this period, Epstein was clearly involved in a world of shadow banking practices up front. Per his claims to several friends, um, a few press reports, prior to his 2007 arrest, Epstein had been a financial bounty hunter, helped, recover stolen money on behalf of powerful people, had been involved in front companies, offshore banking, um, and basically ultimately involved in a lot of money tracing, which is interesting, as it relates to the Promise software because he has Mossad ties. Was he using the Promise software to trace this looted money down? If Aiden Khashoggi was indeed Epstein's client, it suggests that Epstein may have also been associated with BCCI, where Khashoggi did a lot of his money laundering. If Epstein worked in this financial bounty hunter capacity for Khashoggi, it's very likely that he would have come in contact with BCCI during this period because that was the main bank that Khashoggi used. In addition to weapon sales to Iran, it involved Norinco during this period in which Lease, Epstein, and Khashoggi are alleged to have been involved, also made heavy use of BCCI to do the transfers. And here's a quote from a Washington Post 91 article. According to a Hong Kong source with detailed knowledge of China's weapons sales policies, until recently, the BCCI was the bank of choice for the arms exporters. With its extensive Mid-East operation, because it was in Pakistan, and reputed money laundering proclivities, BCCI would have been a natural fit for the Chinese. BCCI also operated in Beijing, because remember they had an extensive network, um, and in 27 branches in Hong Kong itself, which was called the Bank of Credit and Commerce Hong Kong. Years later, when BCCI was collapsing, the Lipo Group of Realty family, who boasted close ties to Bill Clinton, we talked about them extensively, and Bush, Jackson, Stevens would attempt to intervene to rescue the BCC Hong Kong branch. It's worth noting the involvement of Riotti and Stevens with the BCCI subsidiary that was used by Norinco and other state-owned firms during this period. This is because, as will be detailed later, Epstein may have been involved in arms smuggling activities related to a network that spanned the Clinton White House, Norinco and Poly Group, and the Realties in the mid-1990s. The fact that Epstein would find himself enmeshed in these same networks in the mid-90s further corroborates his involvement in these same networks in the mid-80s. Hoffenberg would be found dead in his apartment in late August 2022 and noticeably confided to Edward Salls, Szall, off the record that Epstein had had a relationship with BCCI, but did not provide any specifics. BCCI's considerable intelligence ties and the reported intelligence connections of Khashoggi and Lease also made it worth considering Epstein's past claims, as cited by Nigel Roser, that he once worked for the CIA. You can't do business with, BCCI and not know, um, or be involved in the CIA, because it basically was a CIA front bank. And we know that because of our Operation Gladio, looks into BCCI and what its whole purpose was, why it was set up, and by who. In addition, at the time of this operation involving Khashoggi, Lease, and Epstein, around 1983, Khashoggi had employed 2 other men deeply enmeshed in these networks, which was Ray Cohn and Robert Keith Gray. Gray is the guy with the PR company. Notably, Gray also very much involved in BCCI. Both Cohn and Gray were involved in sexual blackmail operations. Khashoggi himself had been called by Vanity Fair, quote, "one of the greatest whoremongers in the world," unquote. His biographer, quote, "his," meaning Khashoggi's, "whole modus operandi was to influence clients with his opulent lifestyle," unquote, and quote, "He would give them potential clients anything they wanted, girls, food, cash. He had quite a variety of occasions on the boat. Some of those very formal, some were orgies," unquote. According to the UK's Independent, one of the girls used in this way was Pamela Bordes, Bordes, later spoke of being part of an enormous group used as sexual bait, suggesting that Khashoggi's commanded a veritable harem at his disposal for potential clients. And if our past holds true, all of his boats would have been geared with surveillance equipment. In the case of politicians and diplomats, it's entirely possible Khashoggi's yacht was a means of collecting blackmail. Of course it was. This is also alleged by the head of a highly connected call girl ring for Tuna Israel, AKA Madam Tuna, that we discussed in chapter 7. Notably, Khashoggi's infamous yacht would be sold to Ray Cohn's protege, Donald Trump, in 1988 with the involvement of the Sultan of Brunei. The Sultan of Brunei would become Epstein's landlord in the office he shared with Evangeline Ortalis Perry, and in a future chapter, there's gonna be a lot more on that. Cohn and Gray were very close to then CIA Director Bill Casey. Gray's case, as noted, described him as boasting of his close relationship with William Casey. In Cohn's case, Christian Seymour, Cohn's longtime switchboard operator, said Casey and Cohn were close, they talked daily, we talked about that in the last chapter. Um, Immediately after Reagan's electoral victory, both Cohn and Gray took Khashoggi on as clients, and that was the beginning of the Iran-Contra. Jeffrey Epstein would follow suit shortly after his resignation from Bear Stearns. Casey had been the legal representative of Bear Stearns during Epstein's time there, so he would have known all about Epstein's, corrupt dealings. Cohn, Gray, and Casey, together raises possibilities that Epstein may have first been exposed to the idea of sexual blackmail operations during that period, due to his proximity to all these people who were involved in it already, and the fact that BCCI is involved because that's where, BCCI had already been accused of being involved in sex trafficking of minors. In a report entitled "The BCCI Affair" by then US Senator John Kerry and Hank Brown, BCCI officials were alleged to have le leverage over and curried favor with powerful individuals, ruling families, UAE, by providing them with young virgins, many of whom were under the age of 18. The report specifically states BCCI's involvement in prostitution arose out of the creation of its Special Protocol Department in Pakistan to service the personal requirements of the Al Nahyan family of Abu Dhabi, and on an as-needed basis for other BCCI VIPs, including families of other Middle East rulers. Several of the BCCI officers described the protocol department handling of prostitution to Senate investigators in private, and 2 people confirmed their general knowledge of the practice in testimony. The prostitution handled by BCCI was carried over from practices originally instituted by its founder, Agna Hassan, at the at United Bank, then working with a woman, Begum Asghar Braham. He cemented his relationship with the, ruling family through providing them with Pakistani prostitutes, and there's more to that, I'm not gonna basically go into that, just know that, um, the protocol had to do, with doing this. But there is one section I do wanna read. According to one US investigator with substantial knowledge of BCCI activity, some BCCI officials have acknowledged that some of the females provided some members of the ruling family in UAE were young girls who had not even reached puberty, in certain cases were physically injured by the experience. The official said that former BCCI officials had told him that they also provided males to homosexual VIPs. That's how gross this whole thing is. This BCCI-run sex trafficking operation has become obvious similarities to the operation that would be ran by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Returning to the matter of Epstein's past claims to have been tied to the CIA, there's evidence that Norenko, specifically working with CIA assets to arm the CIA-backed Mujahideen in Afghanistan, Michael Rakhano, who was then directly affiliated with the CIA and who programmed the backdoor into Promise, also claimed to have personally assisted the CIA effort to arm the Mujahideen in Afghanistan with unassembled Chinese rocket systems in 1986, which obviously kind of pairs up with all of this Norinco, dealings. So, we've got the Afghanistan tie-in, we've got China, we've got Iran, the whole Iran-Contra. Um, Gary Webb's book, Dark Alliance, also talked about that FBI would later refer the company in a case filed by Andrew Thornton II, calling it a CIA-linked network of former special forces officers and law enforcement involved in smuggling cocaine to the US. That's Operation Gladio. So, another associate of R Racano during this period was J. Patrick Moriarty, was also deeply involved in the negotiation agreement with China during this period in the Norinco connection to BCCI, um, alleged connections to Epstein and then CIA-connected, um, Racontasuco makes the case that Norinco was involved with the CIA-affiliated individuals and entities during this period, which kinda goes with what we already know about what the CIA was doing in Southeast Asia. Furthermore, given that Khashoggi was affiliated with Saudi, America, British, and Israel intelligence by 1982, it's possible that Epstein made his way into this fold of intelligence himself through Khashoggi. I think that's unequivocal. Um, Also, Epstein's affiliation to national intelligence agencies was basically confirmed in 2019 when the Secretary of Labor, Alex Acosta, who had signed off on Epstein's sweetheart deal, was basically said the reason why he was told he had to do that was because Epstein belonged to intelligence and he had to leave it alone. So we know that he eventually resigned as a result of that, but it verifies the fact that Epstein was tied into intelligence networks. The entire um, as it is entirely possible that Epstein once claimed he worked for the CIA and later affiliated with the intelligence agencies and could have potentially been a double or even triple agent. Um, I think it's just I don't even know at this point if you follow the concept of the international syndicate, it's not even relevant if you're a double or triple agent. All of these intel agencies are all working for the same head table, okay? There's not, um, opposing forces in all of this. I've just come to that realization. Um, it's basically they're sellouts and they're gonna sell their stuff to the highest, offer. Former Israeli intelligence officer Ari Ben Menash, who Whitney interviewed in December 2019, said Epstein's affiliation with Israeli intelligence dated back to at least the mid-80s, which corresponds to when he left, Bear Stearns. He said he was personally introduced to Epstein by Robert Maxwell, um, and that would have had to have been approved by higher ups. supposedly it happened at Maxwell's offices in London. He believes one of the higher ups would have been Barack, Ehud, Ehud, Barak, Barak, the future prime minister of Israel. He was head of Israeli military intelligence at the time, and he said that he doesn't remember the exact dates, but Barack would later become infamous for his close proximity not only to Epstein, but his sex trafficking and sex blackmail operations that we're gonna talk about in the next chapter. So again, these people all fit this mold. They have been immersed in this blackmail, sex trafficking, and Epstein is just one tiny little spoke in this big machine. After initial introductions, he would witness Epstein at Maxwell's office on several occasions. He made, frequent visits, um, said that Jesselyn Maxwell accompanied her father frequently, so it's his, um, assumption that that's how Epstein met Jesselyn Maxwell, and she was involved in his intelligence operations. um He stopped short of saying that how involved she was and what had specifically been involved in her father's death, but we've heard it alleged that many people believe that her and Epstein became much closer after her father left, almost as if Epstein stepped into her father's role, both with her personally and in this network. So, close ties to Israel's government later in his life can also be seen in odd visit Epstein made to Israel in 2008. It was odd partially because of the timing. It took place during the course of his trial. Um, it was a few months before he was sentenced to prison, on the original Florida trafficking, and it was reported that Epstein was staying at the Tel Aviv Hilton and that he was visiting military bases and looking at Israeli research, scientific, uh, programs. According to, um, the reports, access to military bases is something very difficult to get, for regular tourists, which means it can't happen. Um, even for very wealthy ones, you can't, like, buy your way in there, so they obviously, he was involved in something much bigger than it just being a tourist, excursion because he was escorted around military bases. Um, Barack was a key reason behind Bill Clinton's controversial pardon of Mark Rich, and Epstein may have thought a similar intervention would work on his behalf. Well, Epstein actually got a better deal because he wasn't prosecuted. He would have been better off had he been prosecuted on the federal side and either found guilty or been given a pardon than having been processed on the state side where the conviction and they basically evidently had no control over that unless for some reason they didn't want him to have a, federal conviction on his record. Um but basically, he got the same treatment everybody else did. They stamped national security on it because it's an intel op, and, the feds decided not to pursue it. Um, so both Israeli and British intelligence were already involved in the acquisition of sexual blackmail domestically within the US. Some blackmail sources were called services operating in New York and Washington, DC that sexually exploited minors. In a 1982 New York State Select Committee on Crime, an investigation into these networks of underage sex trafficking and production of child pornography saw committee investigator Dale Smith reveal that an accountant for several call service operations in DC named Robert Kohler, Koehler, was selling information on the sexual proclivities of the clients to agents of foreign intel services. 2 other call service operations called Brian's Boys and Fantasies Unlimited were operated out of Alexandria, Virginia, and managed by Jonathan C. Reynolds. Reynolds told Smith that he was selling information out of the call services specifically to British and Israeli intelligence. Smith also stated that Soviet military intelligence had been purchasing similar information from other call services in Washington. Epstein's involvement in intelligence during this period and his sex trafficking activities suggest that these operations, as well as others practiced during this period, may have been part of a blueprint for Epstein's own subsequent sex trafficking, or all part of the same network, because they have to have this. If this is one big network, which I suspect it is, they have, um, different levels of boutique sex trafficking, and they also have, um they have a network. They're in all of the different locations. So, let's just think about this logically for a second. If your national, international intelligence services, because of your spying who all has this sex information and who's all running this. Because remember, you have to launder the money. They have promise. They know all of this. They're tracking everybody that is doing money laundering via promise. They're they're tracking all of your financial, and these people are stupid enough to use credit cards, hello? So, there is no possibility on God's green earth that the CIA and all of these intelligence networks don't already know who these people are and who's frequenting them. So, acting as if these are isolated incidents is retarded. They are not. They know all of them. Even if they're not controlling every single one of them, they're aware of all of them, because there's only so many banks and so many front companies that you can launder this ill-gotten gains money from. Okay, let's see what else we got. I think we're gonna this obviously taking a little bit longer just because I think it's so important that we get this. I might go ahead and stop right here. We've got 2 more sections of this, and then we're gonna go on to the next chapter, and we'll do that, um, on our next, schedule, which I think is tomorrow. Um, and again, I appreciate y'all being here. I want all of us to, and I say this every single time, I want us to have the foundation, and I want us to be able to elevate our thinking to a network kinda hive thinking, where we can look at all of the stuff that's happening, um, and be able to objectively evaluate it with the underpinning of Operation Gladio and current events. So, there's no way in hell that all of this stuff isn't connected, because all of the same people appear every single time. And that's, by the end of this book, is going to be driven home unequivocally, the same people. But let me make a point here in my glass half full. So, do you think it's any coincidence that Donald Trump ended up with that yacht? That yacht had been used and hooked up with all kinds of sensitive, um, intelligent gathering, um, video, and I don't think it's any coincidence that he ends up with that yacht. It is possible that people who had been accustomed to coming onto that yacht would have continued to do so, whether the yacht was rented out and them knowing, not knowing that they were being eavesdropped on. But honestly speaking, come on. If I'm a congressman and I frequent, a establishment, a boat, or whatever, and I'm being blackmailed, and somebody else tells me that they've been, around someone else or a picture is taken of you with someone else, you know they're being blackmailed. Every single person who has done something wrong in their life involved in these networks, everybody else around them knows they're all being blackmailed because they're being blackmailed. So, it's not like they don't know this is happening. That to me is the frustrating part of it. They know it's happening, we know it's happening, and now they know we know because of all the revelations, whether you like Q or not, it broke the dam. We all now know. They hate the fact that we now all know, and we know because of Donald Trump. So, that's that's the big, um, difference in dealing with this stuff today, and you're right, Epstein is a little fish in a big pond, and it is not coincidental that he was rearrested during Donald Trump's presidency. So was Ghislaine Maxwell, but there's so many more of them. But I do believe in the chess game, that was kind of a if not a checkmate, it was definitely, "We're coming for you." So, that was a warning shot over the bow that no one's exempt, "We're coming for you." And now imagine if you're Israel and Epstein's your guy, Ghislaine Maxwell's your girl, and they're both taken off the chessboard. They were taken off the chessboard by Donald Trump. So, I think those things are huge, and that's why I always look at things, um, from the glass half full perspective. No one else was willing to do that, and it had to be done. So, that's all I got. We'll pick up where we left off tomorrow. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Don't forget, as, Bridget pointed out, I believe, or, Lucy, click the, thumbs up button if you wouldn't mind, and, follow us if you're not following us. At some point, we're gonna get over that. I lost my cheerleader, Julie, and getting everybody over. Raven's gonna have to jump in there. We're at 574 followers. We need to get that up as high as we can go because there's the algorithm in Rumble that based on the thumbs up and your followers that rank you when certain people search on different things. I've got my daughter, adding more hashtags to the things that we're talking about. I'm not very good at that, so that it will show up on searches better. I think that will help the exposure. Again, I make no money on this. We don't have a big enough audience. I just want to get the money. Um, Julie's doing better. Julie's back home. She had another, fall, and, it was just a bump on her head, and they're kind of figuring out how to get her around the house a little bit better, but she's definitely on the mend. Thank you for your prayers. Please keep her in your prayers. We miss her terribly. Vital part of our team, but, I do text with her, and talk with her, as do several of you, and I really appreciate y'all being there for her. It means a lot to her, I know. So, God bless Julie, keep her in your prayers, and thank you, Tara, for asking. Um, have a nice day, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Well, at least talk to you tomorrow.